Welcome to episode number 2 of Extreme Reloading. In our first episode for season number 9 this season, we talked about equipment. Started talking about everything from reloading presses to the shell holder and dies, etc., etc. And we're talking about these things starting with the bare essentials, and then we're going to be working it up all the way through extreme reloading. Well, today we're going to be talking about components, reloading components. And we're going to be focusing on the 5.56 for center fire rifle, 223 as well, and the 9mm Luger for center fire pistol. So let's start talking about these components kind of from the ground up. And where we got to start is cases. We're going to be focusing on brass cases. And bare essentials, this is what we're talking about. A bag full of once fired or maybe twice fired, whatever, brass that you may have shot yourself, may have picked some of these things up at the shooting range and have collected quite a bunch of cases. Now, we've got an entire video on brass goblins, probably myself and a lot of you included, and things to look for to make sure that whatever brass you are picking up, that it's going to be safe for you to use and fire. Because those brass cases, you're not really sure if that's truly a once fired case or fired 10 times, something like that. But you know what we have here is just some nice 5.56 brass, some 223 brass. This is some Lake City brass right here. And I've got some Ammo Incorporated brass. That's a different one. I don't use that one too much. And Winchester, etc., etc. Now, from bare essentials, whether it is center fire rifle, in this case the 5.56, or if it's your 9mm Luger pistol case, from the bare essentials, you might have stuff like Blazer brass, Remington, Hornady, Winchester, etc., etc. Just a variety of different brass. And that's all good. There's different levels of quality of brass, I'll tell you. We're going to talk about that here in just a little bit. But bare essentials, you've got to have brass that's in good shape, good condition for you to reload with it. We also have a little bit of terminology, some jargon we need to be aware of. And I've got this very nice, shiny, nickel-plated brass case. This happens to be, again, one of these Winchester cases for 5.56. And there's different parts of it that we're going to be talking about. So let's start from the end here, the base to the mouth. Well, this is actually called the head of this cartridge, of this case. The cartridge is a fully loaded case. This is the head, and in particular, we're looking at the rim right over here, the extractor groove, the body of the case itself, the shoulder of the case, the neck of the case, and the mouth. Now, if you try to visualize this as an analogy to the human body, that is one odd-looking fellow, because the body is between the head and the mouth. Doesn't really make sense. Don't even try to visualize it. That's just how it is with brass cases or any sort of rifle case. We call these bottleneck cases simply because of this shoulder gives it kind of a bottleneck shape. Pistol cases are a little bit easier, not so many distinct parts to it. Let's take a look at one of these. Very similar in many ways. We have the head, rim, extractor, groove, body, mouth. No shoulder, no neck on this 9mm. So we dispense of a couple of those areas of a given case. Now, even though you can, let's say, get away with running a bunch of variety of brass cases, a little bit of Winchester, a little bit of Remington, a little bit of Hornady brass, load it up, shoot it, most likely, safely, without too many problems at all. Probably quite a bit of variability in it, but you can effectively mix and match brass cases. I don't really recommend that, though. I don't recommend that at all. So even though that is considered a bare essentials, there are differences between different makes of brass. I've spent quite a bit of time weighing and sorting brass and looking at all different sorts of brass over the years. And what I found is that some brass tends to be on the heavy side and some brass tends to be on the light side. And it really doesn't matter what case, particular cartridge you're loading for. Hornady brass tends to be kind of heavy and thick. The Norma brass that I have used a fair amount now for the 556 and 223, Norma tactical brass they call it, extremely thick stuff. In fact, it's so thick that I actually have to use a different load, a different recipe for that brass whenever I load with that brass. So even though bare essentials you can kind of mix and match, you can get away with it usually unless you start pushing toward the maximum charge, those sort of things. I recommend at least sort all of your brass by head stamp. So when you go to load, you're going to load a whole bunch of Remington Peters brass. And then you're going to load and work with a bunch of Winchester brass and then some Lake City, and you get the idea, right? So at least do that. That's going to be really important, number one, to really help you with the consistency of your rounds that you're producing and keep you really, really safe. So one of the rules of reloading is whenever you change a component, you should work up the load again. Sometimes, yes, indeed, you can get away with not doing it, but I don't recommend that. Be very careful when you're doing this stuff because we do know that there are differences in different makes of brass. Yes, brass is brass. I understand that. But the different thicknesses of the brass especially can make a huge difference. The other part that makes a big difference, we're kind of moving into some extremes now, is what we call the softness profile along the length of that case. So for instance, on a given case, the head end down here needs to be and must be fairly hard relative to the mouth. And there's a gradient, right, between hardness and softness over here. If that gradient is too abrupt, we're going to have a case separation at that point where where that gradient is really changing in hardness, softness, and oftentimes if we do load and load and load and we stretch this case and it becomes harder and harder and harder this way, we're going to end up having that crack right about there, just above what we call the web on the inside, the web of the case itself. So that's a consideration, certainly. We see that problem normally with brass that's been loaded several times, so we see a change in that gradient. The gradient in hardness to softness can vary by manufacturer. Some manufacturers are much more critical of how that hardness profile looks, and others less so. But the thickness is actually really important. Number one, it's going to affect your case capacity, how much powder can it fit in. And then that's your burn chamber, how quickly the pressure is going to rise when you're firing that case. But also, a very thick neck is going to affect the ductility of that brass and how well and how quickly and uniformly it opens up to release that bullet. Thinner brass will tend to open up more quickly, but also it tends to be, if it's uniform thickness and not too terribly thick, it will open up very uniformly, very consistently, shot to shot to shot. Now, when we start getting into the extremes, right, we're going to then walk away from kind of the normal fodder of brass that we might see on the shelves of a sporting goods store and move up to some of the premium brass. And I certainly want to talk about that. One of the premium brass companies that I have used is ADG. I haven't used this too much, but I've got this box here of 50 cases for my .308 Winchester. It is pretty darn good brass, no doubt about that. Another premium brass offering is Alpha Munitions. Alpha Munitions, really good stuff, really good stuff. And I've got some of these loaded here again for my .308 Winchester. These are happens to be topped with the Sierra tipped Match Kings that my Ruger Precision Rifle really likes. And there is one of these very nice Alpha Munitions cases, brand new. This one has never been loaded at all. One of the things that you'll notice sometimes on these brass cases is looks like a discoloration, and that discoloration, almost like a silvery grayish look there on the neck and into the shoulder, a little bit down into the body. We don't want to see that go too far down into the body. You know what all those words mean now. That is caused by annealing. That's where the company, the manufacturer, in this case Alpha Munitions, annealed this case, probably one of the final steps in case preparation, and intentionally softened the neck of this case to have it perform all the better. We're going to talk a little bit more about annealing and cases and so on and so forth when we start resizing and prepping cases later on in this season of extreme reloading. Another one of our premium cases, brass companies, is Lapua. I have used Lapua brass for years and years, I guess probably well over a decade, maybe a couple decades, and really, really nice stuff. This happens to be for my 300 PRC, recently purchased one of those rifles, and there again we see that very nice annealing done at the factory from Lapua, and wow, what a nice bunch of cases. I've used so much Lapua, everything from here, the 300 PRC, I've used it in 416 Rigby, even 223 and 556. Is that bare essentials? Nope, not at all. You can certainly craft some safe and reliable ammo using Winchester, Hornady, Ruger, all that sort of stuff. But again, remember, at least sort by head stamp and work up your loads if you start using different brass over time. Now the next part of loading a case, once we have that case, it's all prepped, whatever, is we want to or need to prime it. Well, we then need primers, right? So there are two different sizes of primers. There is a small primer and a large primer. There also is what we would then further characterize as a small pistol, large pistol, small rifle, large rifle. Here we have some examples. These both happen to be CCI. I like CCI quite a bit. Have had good success, great success with CCI primers. I also really like the Federal primers, especially the Federal gold medal match primers. This primer here is a BR4 small rifle primer. This is a BR2 large rifle primer. What is BR? BR is CCI's designation for bench rest. Federal's equivalent is the match, gold medal match primers. For Berry Essentials, is bench rest or match primers essential or necessary? No, you don't need that. However, again, if you are seeking for the kind of the ultimate, the extreme, as precise as possible, as consistent as possible loads that you're producing, then I know without a doubt, bench rest, match primers, going to help you achieve that. Again though, safe, reliable ammo, the standard small rifle or small pistol, whatever it is, going to work fine for you. If you are loading something like the 300 PRC that I mentioned earlier, you're going to need large rifle Magnum primers. I've been loading for quite a long time my 7mm Remington Magnum, my .338 Winchester Magnum, and both of those take large rifle Magnum primers. Don't be substituting large rifle for large rifle Magnum. You need that extra amount of primer compound, that extra amount of ignition force to make sure that that large volume of powder ignites uniformly, safely, and burns as expected. So no cutting corners there as far as Berry Essentials go, okay? So watch your recipe, look at that recipe carefully, and make sure you have all the correct components. Now, next go on. Let's talk now about powder, right? There are a variety of different powders we need to know about. Let's start off with spherical powders or ball type powders. Here's a good example. Accurate 2230. Well, I use this one for my 223 and 556. You can use it for others if the recipe calls for it. This is made by Accurate. It is a double base smokeless powder. We're going to talk about double base and single base in just a little bit. But this is one type of powder, a spherical or ball powder. These, by the way, tend to flow through the electronic scale and dispenser systems just beautifully. I mean, they just flow so nicely, it's almost like you're pouring water right through it. And so they're kind of a joy to use that way. The second that we're going to talk about is a flake powder. This is Unique, made by Alliant. And Unique's got I guess a bad reputation that has hung around with some folks that I still hear, oh, it's so filthy, it's so dirty. But now it says cleaner burning. It said cleaner burning for a long time, and it really isn't dirty. I have had no problems loading and using Unique, and I use it in so many different pistol rounds. I think every one of my pistol rounds use this. I use this all the way from my .44 Magnum to 9mm Luger, .45 ACP, etc., etc. This is a flake powder, okay? It also is a double base powder. It's also double base. So we've got two double base powders on the bench right now. Here we have a single base. Hodgdon's Varget. Hodgdon's Varget came out now quite a number of years ago, and it has such a wonderful reputation. It is just an excellent powder. It's what they call an extreme powder. Different companies use different names. What extreme powder means is that it's temperature compensated. So this powder will not vary much if you shoot it in cold temperatures versus if you shoot it in very hot temperatures. Okay, so this is a single base powder, and a lot of your single base powders will be able to achieve temperature consistencies. I've done a lot of testing where I'll go out purposely on a day when it is 0 degrees Fahrenheit or lower here, run the chronograph, really watch that first shot. Everything's cold, and look at that velocity that I'm getting, and then I'll go back to the range another time purposely when it's 100 degrees Fahrenheit or more, and repeat that same experiment with that exact same load. Okay, and I have seen that these powders will still vary some. They will tend to be faster in higher pressures at higher temperatures. So it's a positive correlation. The double base powders are kind of interesting. Single base powder is based on nitrocellulose entirely, effectively. The double base powders are based on nitrocellulose and nitroglycerin. At cold temperatures, those two bases, nitrocellulose and nitroglycerin, will start to want to separate. The characteristics of the powder itself will actually start changing at a molecular level. And so this was interesting to me. I worked up a load for my 45 ACP, took it out in the winter. It wasn't really terribly cold. It was about 10 degrees Fahrenheit on that particular day. And I shot that, and it shot just beautifully. I worked up my load round after round, and that final load, something like 5.7 grains of unique with that 45 ACP, it was topping easily 1,000 feet per second and edging toward 1,100 feet per second. It was really going. But it was a nice linear change in that velocity profile. I wasn't too concerned about it, and it fired perfectly safe. The primers showed no sign of pressure problems. It shot really, really well. Well, then I used that exact same load because it shot just a ragged hole. 5 shots, tiny little ragged hole. Wow, it did just a wonderful job. So I wanted to keep using that. I went out in the summertime, and I was getting about 930, 950 feet per second. Well, that's different. Normally, we see powders increase in velocity and hot temperatures and achieve slower velocities in cold temperatures. So it made me kind of scratch my head, did a little bit of research on that. And I think what was happening is in then cold temperatures, this double base powder started to show those signs of change. And I was getting some much faster velocity. So it's not always true that cold equals slow, hot equals fast. Now I'm talking about ambient air conditions. But that's one of the differences you can expect when we start talking about and using different single base versus double base powders. We're going to spend a little bit more time talking about powders when we get to that part of charging our cases, and we'll then talk about burn rate, from a slow burn rate to a very fast burn rate. Well, once we have a case with a primer in it, we have charged it properly, we then need to top it all off so our powder doesn't fall out or spill out. And of course, that's the whole idea. We got to have a bullet we're going to push down the bore. So here's some of our bullets. Let's talk about bullets just a little bit. This is a Barnes tipped triple shock bullet. It's an all copper hunting bullet. Very good terminal performance on these Barnes bullets. In fact, I just love Barnes bullets. This happens to be the 62 grain TTSX for a 5.56. Really excellent bullets. And then the other example that I have here is a handgun bullet, short and fat and proud of that, as they say. There's a nice, this is a Sig Sauer Sierra V-Crown bullet, 124 grain bullet for that 9mm. I really like this bullet. Good for reloading those 9mm, and a pretty good choice for personal defense or home defense. We'll talk a lot more about bullets when we get to that part of that episode here in Extreme Reloading. Now, there are numerous brands that you can choose from, almost a dizzying number of brands of bullets out there, everything from Barnes to Sierra, Speer, and the list just goes on and on and on. Lapua makes some really nice bullets, etc., etc. You're going to want to find a bullet that shoots well in your rifle or your pistol. No guarantees that what works for me and my rifle or pistol is going to work so well for you. So there's a fair amount of experimentation that you'll need to do. There's also one thing I wanted to mention is this, especially with rifle bullets, this craze around ballistic coefficient, whether it's a G1, older way of estimating ballistic coefficient, or the G7 ballistic coefficient, much newer. The higher the number, the better. Well, yes, it has a better ballistic coefficient, meaning it's more or less more aerodynamic, right? But that doesn't mean it's more accurate. It doesn't mean it's more accurate or more precise. I have seen a lot of bullets with a very high ballistic coefficient that just do not shoot well at all in some of my rifles. Now, the way that these companies are achieving these match-grade high ballistic coefficient bullets is they make them long. They make them long. And one of the big problems that we see with long bullets is that they may not stabilize in your rifle with that certain twist rate on that barrel of your rifle. So don't just choose your bullet because it has the highest ballistic coefficient. Of course, you don't want to waste your money buying 100 different types of bullets and trying them. It'll probably take you a year to try that many different bullets. But look at the forums. Talk to some people who have the same cartridge caliber that you're trying to load for, and see what is working for them. And you probably can narrow things down a little bit. Again, what works for them may not work for you, but at least you might be able to narrow it down to 5 or so bullets that you want to give it a try for. But don't get overly concerned about, I got to have the super high ballistic coefficient. We're going to talk more about that again when we talk about bullets and precision out at the range. Now, the other thing that you're going to need, it's not really a component, it's not really equipment, I guess. It is a reloading manual. Where are you going to get your recipes from, right? So a reloading manual, I will say, I recommend that you buy one. Lyman makes a very good reloading manual. Hornady's is quite good. When I first got started, my kit that I bought, I got a really nice manual from RCBS. I have all of those. I have a Sierra printed manual as well. You don't really need a shelf full of reloading manuals. Now, I know this is heresy to some folks, thinking that I got to have every one that's ever printed, and as they come out with a new version every year, I got to go buy that. That was true, I suppose, some years ago, maybe a decade or more ago, before the internet. Now that the internet and all these different companies post their recipes online or in an app, you really don't need the printed manual anymore. I will say you should have one, because that very first part of a printed manual goes through and gives you some really nice detailed information about reloading in general. And then it gets into the particular recipes that you're going to be using. Now, I am not recommending that you go to Joe's reloading page, right, and see what he's been doing. And that Joe's reloading page said use 120 grains of powder in your 5.56, and you're like, I can't even fit 100. Yeah, don't trust that stuff. Go to and use reliable websites In other words, go to Hornady's website. That's good. Sierra, Barnes, etc. But also, don't forget Hodgdon. Hodgdon has a really, really good website, and a lot of these powder manufacturers do have very nice websites with excellent information about how to load for their powders. So really good resources available for you, and those are free. So that catches things or rounds things up pretty darn nicely for us. Talking now about all those components. We talked previously about equipment. In the next episode, we're going to start working and start loading. So don't miss that next episode of Extreme Reloading. Thanks for watching.